Welcome everyone to our afternoon session, and our first session, and the next three speakers will all be addressing issues around China and the interaction, of course, with Australian agriculture. I guess the significance of this session becomes evident when we look at the fact that China was the market for about 11% of Australian agricultural exports in 2007 and 8, and 22% in 2013-14, and the biggest single export market for agricultural product in total. So any sense we had that what happens in China won't matter much here is obviously no longer the case, if it ever was. So we've got three very well qualified and experienced speakers to talk to us about the reality of the situation in China, what's happening there, what's likely to happen there, and what implications that might have for agriculture in Australia. Our first is Professor Hendrischke, who's the Professor of Chinese Business and Management at the University of Sydney Business School. Hans has a long string of experience. He's the Professor of Chinese Business and Management. He's chair of the Executive Committee of the China Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. He's been also travelled extensively. He was educated at universities in Germany, Taiwan and Japan, and did postgraduate research at the London School of Oriental and African Studies. And he lived in China from 1979, working for the diplomatic service and the finance industry. He leads the business school's Australia-China Business Network and heads a multi-year strategic cooperation with KPMG, which reports regularly on Chinese outbound direct investment in Australia and publishes thought leadership reports on Australia-China business relations. He's also co-authored the Australia-China Business Council's 2014 Australia-China Trade Report. So to give us very much a higher level perspective on developments in China and what they might mean, please welcome Hans Hendrischke.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to talk to you. And I have a long-standing interest in agriculture from early childhood, when a farm had 2 horses, 5 cows, some chickens, some pigs, and whatever else you needed, but these times have gone. Briefly, what Nick mentioned, our work at the business school, we publish the regular reports on demystifying Chinese investment in Australia. That is based on a database which we have established out of individual projects, so it's different from what ABS has and what FIRB has, in that we follow projects up from $5 million US. We've done that since 2012 now, so we have a fairly good overview of what investment flows from China into Australia, including a breakdown into different types of ownership and different areas of industries. The other report, which is something new that we've done, is the Australia-China Trade Report, which was launched this year in Canberra at the ACBC's Canberra Day. What we did in that report was to use some new data which had not been used before, input-output data, to essentially take away the resources sector from the exchange with China and to look at what remains if you look at the other areas. And to our surprise, most of the other areas, I think with the exception of the textile sectors, are all growing very strongly, something that we tend to overlook when we look at the resources boom, but all of those areas are growing strongly, including manufacture, where China is one of the major clients for Australia, and unlike the other major partners with a strong growth trend. And of course that applies to agriculture as well. So that was one of the results we had, that Australia will, for the foreseeable future, be quite dependent on its relations with the Chinese market. And of course that is a market that is very much in transition or very dynamic and very strongly developing. And one of the questions I was asked here in the briefing is, what do I think, or what is my view on the stock market fluctuations and the reports that we read in the press. Now, I don't claim to have any major wisdom, but what I clearly do not do is to subscribe to the ideas that this signals in any way the decline or an impending collapse of the Chinese economy. It signals a whole lot of other things. In the end, it signals too a very strong commitment by the Chinese leadership to push companies into the stock market. And the point to keep in mind when looking at those figures is that the stock market in China plays a very different role from what the stock market does here. The stock market is not a reflection of the economy overall. The stock market is part of a corporatization of the state-owned sector, primarily, which, in other words, is to say the purpose of the stock market is to shift control from the bureaucracy to corporate shareholders to then control companies that are officially state-owned, but where the ownership and the management, in fact, is not all that clear. So it's a shift from bureaucratic control to corporate control. And what happened, I think, in 2015, or beginning 2014, was that the Chinese government did get somewhat overconfident in pushing investors and small retail investors into the stock market, which they should not have done. The banking regulator actually wrote to Xinhua News Agency in April this year and said, please stop your propaganda, you're doing damage, and the damage was quite easily visible a few months later. So now we are back at a level that we probably had quite a while back. If you look at the more long-term figures, I think the trend will be that the stock market is going to grow slowly, unpredictably if you work on individual companies, because the way they develop is not decided so much by their earnings, but more by the market and by the way in which the state pushes new companies into the stock market. So that is part of a transition, but I don't think it's a signal for being too worried or a signal of the health of the Chinese share market. What I wanted to do today is, however, not so much either focus on those macroeconomic aspects or look at the statistics, but take up the latest developments, and that is to look at the fifth plenum. I put the full name here just to show you how frightening these things sound. If you translate it into something like basic English, what this whole long title for the proposal of the formulation and whatever means, it's a policy platform. It's the equivalent of a policy platform that a party would put up here, giving their policy priorities. It's relevant this year because this proposal and these plans are in fact the anticipation of the next 5-year plan. So that's the 5-year plan that comes in at the end of, or early next year. There's no full document on that yet, but there were some documents published in this plenary session which had to approve the at least the principles of the 5-year plan. And for those who work, of course, on the ground, they know that elements of the 5-year plan will have already been anticipated in all kind of pilot projects and on-the-ground projects. The main points of this plan is, now in very general terms, entrepreneurship. I think if you put it under a larger topic, it's basically marketization. It's reducing again bureaucratic control. It's developing a better institutional infrastructure on the finance and banking side, on the public finance side as well. Reduction of government intervention into pricing, which is relevant for agriculture, and doubling of GDP. So that's the overall aim that China at the moment is quite confident that they will be able to push developments at quite a high speed. And then they have a number of highlights, which is focusing around innovation, environment. We'll come to that in a second. The main challenges, I would argue, are environment, because that's something that is really felt everywhere. No longer in Beijing or North China anymore, but these areas of pollution move in large blocks down to South China, in areas where you have nothing but agriculture, and suddenly you wake up one morning and you have this solid pollution sitting over a region where if you go by bus, you see suddenly the driver is putting on the windscreen wiper, but there's nothing to wipe. It's just the fog that is made of pollution. So that is putting pressure on the government, and part of the solution is agriculture. That is one very immediate pressure on the government. Another pressure is the innovation in manufacturing, which is now for the first time part of a 5-year plan. In a way, it has not been before. It's called China 2025, and is in fact an adaptation of some new technological movement and technological processes that come from Europe, sometimes called Industry 4.0. That is being pushed down from kind of government levels to local government levels to local companies, and I've come across that in China now in a whole range of locations where I didn't even suspect it, and people suddenly said, well, we are working on that and trying to bring this integration of software in the production side, on the conveyor belts, wherever it is, and the administration, so you have in the end a sophisticated form of manufacturing that can compete with European and some East Asian manufacturers. And then the third major area is a broad area, and that links health, diet, social welfare, care for people all together in one broad area, where, of course, agriculture is a major contributor. This time, the main points of the program were not only put up in terms of very long, hard-to-read documents, but they also have neat slides, and they even had a video, which I'm not going to show you. It's meant to be funny, but it's kind of retro rock, and the Chinese rumor has it that it was done by the daughter of Xi Jinping, and therefore had to be played on Xinhua News Agency website. So my students thought it was a bit silly, but that's another point. Out of the first 32 main points, I would like to talk about a few that relate directly to agriculture, and I think that gives you an idea on where agriculture is to be taken. The points they make, these other points out of the program, is the first point is a reference, and that's the first point of the program, reference to agriculture, that production has risen continually, plus some demographic change, but that rising of production is relevant because what has happened this year and over the past few years is that stockpiling has started to occur. That agricultural, mainly grain harvests, were so good that the stockpiling now is becoming a problem, and that the government has figured out that in fact they are losing money because the government purchase prices that are given to the farming population are higher than international prices. So this is something that is being discussed much more clearly. That the change or that the way in which agricultural welfare and welfare for regional farming population has to be managed is changing now, and that there's a need to move to a stronger marketing or control of markets by markets to get problems solved that occur with stockpiling and overpricing for state purchases. Another point down the line, they're a bit mixed, is cyber economics and digitalization. That comes in other documents as well, and it's clearly a reference, or references are made, that this is important for agriculture, and that part of agricultural modernization should be linked to sophisticated new technologies in order to spread these and mobilize supply chains, logistics chains, and run them in a more sophisticated way. All of this was probably there before, but it's now policy, and of course the way in which the central government is funded at the moment, which is very well. There are means to do that, and they're putting in place infrastructure, institutional infrastructure to do that. Another area which is relevant is professional farmers, or professionalization of farming. That is linked to a whole range of areas, among them the way in which land is controlled and which land rights are given. But the main point here is that it's linked to training and upgrading of agricultural production. Protection of cultivated land, this is linked to environment and to make sure that land is not over-industrialized and that there's a decent balance. That is linked to the next point as well with urbanization. Urbanization is going to increase, which means essentially it's probably something the other way around. It means social welfare is pushed further down the countryside. So the rural population will have more motivation and will be more integrated and being part of agricultural markets. That again is linked to legal land use rights of farmers, which again is linked then to the local registration system. So there's a strong institutional push going on to overall move the way the countryside is run, which will lead to much greater interaction and mobility between countryside and urban sectors. Because that's point number 14, one of those, where people who migrate to the countryside will retain land rights in their original areas of registration. So that means people don't have to be afraid that they will lose land. They can go back, and of course that will lead to a better flow of technology between urban and rural areas. Finally, they have forest protection plans which relate also to agricultural land, returning land to farmland and so on. And the last point is central and local governments, provincial governments, creating various channels for poverty alleviation. Again, that essentially means there is more money flowing into the countryside because also this one is moving away from the subsidy principle to much more of a market principle. Behind that are a number of broad points. And I've put them under the three headings. You can think about it. They can be arranged in different ways, but largely one is marketization. That links to the price of state purchasing, links to change of land rights. Another aspect of that will have an effect on agriculture is protection of farmland from over fertilizing and so on. The way in which some of these environmental principles are being enforced is move away from physical targets or from capping to pricing signals in this area. That's one big one. Another big one which will have an impact on cooperation with Chinese partners is privatization of state farms. You still have hundreds of big state farms, either on the production side or more on the commercial side, but they are increasingly now being privatized as part of this plan. What of course will mean that you will get players on the market who are heavily capitalized. That privatization is a privatization from the companies I've seen and talked to, where they're fairly well endowed with capital and land and all kind of advantages which they can use to either go overseas or internally either expand or compete within new markets. So these players will eventually come to Australia. They will come into other overseas market and will be changing the face of the old state-owned sector. And then the third area is clearly technical innovation. This is sometimes driven by these state farms, trying to either partner with foreign partners or setting up their own technological innovations to play a bigger role in the national and international market. So I think there are some structural changes. It's easy to say all of this is future and just plans, and we had endless plans under the Communist Party and their system. But looking at it from the perspective of what the government has achieved so far, and the way in which reforms are being pushed through, and the way in which reforms are fairly well integrated, it is quite likely that these points are in fact something that is going to stay, and that will be implemented in a rather reliable fashion, unless something totally unforeseen happens. But the process so far has been quite predictable. That's the broad picture. I wanted to briefly cover one point out of our last report. That was the report we did for 2014, where we had this huge increase in commercial real estate. That's not residential real estate, that's only commercial real estate, which jumped from 13% of Chinese total direct investment into Australia in 2013 to 46%, nearly half, in 2014, and is probably going to increase again. Whether in proportion is too early to say. What is looking very likely is that the change in agribusiness is probably coming through this year. We've been waiting for that, and it was always very low in terms of overall figures that we could guess. But with the projects now in the pipeline, we might get a much bigger increase now in agribusiness. Where this goes overall is yet hard to see. We had, since the end of the mining investment boom, 2013, 2014, we had a slight decline in Chinese investment, around 10%, and that was a result of a steeply declining mining investment and of this steep increase in commercial real estate. So whether we'll have a flat level or whether we'll have an overall increase is too early to tell, but most likely the investment in agribusiness is going to increase and going to make a change. That's something else to keep in mind, that in 2014, for the first time, the ownership had changed, composition of ownership. Until 2013, largely with the big mining investment, we had state-owned enterprises dominating. From 2014 on, we have now, in terms of value even, 66% private and a much, equivalent 30% from the state-owned sector. What seems likely, and that is something to wait for, if these privatizing or corporatized state corporations in agriculture are coming to Australia, it is very hard to say whether they will be appearing as state-owned enterprises or not. Most likely they will be rather private or in transition, but in the sense private that they are not controlled by the state administration of asset control, but they will be controlled by more likely by shareholders. So they are closer to what is called private in the Chinese context. And my final point is, and this is guessing, and people who are in the field will probably have much better grained view on what is happening. But I think some of the points are fairly clear in which way the market will be going, and that is probably that the bulk goods, grain, beef, and the large volume goods that we have will come under competitive pressure as Chinese buyers and suppliers internationalize and can spread their contacts and develop markets. But on the other side, what is happening already is that there are new markets resulting from the more sophisticated demand and the specialization. One example is the investment in the Kimberley, Zhongfu, Shanghai, who had their plans based on sugar. They're now producing jia seeds, which they had to get through the Chinese approval system to be recognized as food items. But once that is done, this is something that they had not envisaged and had not really predicted, but it's now part of their market. So there will be new markets which we probably even can't predict right at the moment, but that will come largely also from operating with Chinese partners. And that is my last point. I think we made that point also in our trade report, that cooperating with Chinese partners is to some extent a necessity, and the necessity in the way that you need contacts to understand the market. Where you have established market, you're probably fine, but if it's a question of being in new markets and seeing where things go, then there's a need for partnerships and for cooperating with people who are driving the market. And probably one final point is that, of course, what that also requires is on the Australian side a degree of coordination, where, again, something that we hear in China, and that probably all of you hear, is that people complain there's a lack of economies of scale. There's not enough volume in the market for them to get engaged on a long-term perspective. So these are more general things, I think, that in the end all flow from these observations. So I'll leave it with this. Thank you.